Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to preserve the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. I'm Cesar Carino, and we have a guest today who is unique. Unique in that he's the only person ever in the city of Wadsworth who has flown outside the sphere of space. Captain Michael Foreman. And Mike, we are so pleased to have you here because, as we all know, you're a native of Wadsworth, born probably not in the city of Wadsworth at that time, but your parents were living here and were here. Tell us a little bit about Mike Foreman, who he is, and starting back, let's see, you're about 50-some years old now, 51, is that correct?
51, right.
How about going back to the prenatal Michael Foreman and go from there? So,
well, my father was a student at the Ohio State University Law School when I was born. So I was actually born in Columbus at University Hospital.
And tell us who your mother was. She had a mother too.
My mother, Nancy Foreman.
What was her maiden name?
Nancy Thalacker Foreman.
And where was she from?
She was born in Fort Dodge, Iowa, and met my father in Columbus while she was working at the hospital down there. As
a nurse.
As a nurse. She had gone to nurses training in Huntington, West Virginia. And they met, got married. My father, soon after I was born, finished law school and moved back here to his home, Wadsworth.
Wadsworth, where he practiced law.
Practiced law.
And tell us a little bit more about what he did.
He was also a district attorney for Medina County and later common pleas judge here in the county. Mm-hmm. And in between those stints in politics, he practiced law downtown Wadsworth.
That is correct.
My mother continued to work in her profession of nursing. Wadsworth Rittman Hospital.
And, absolutely, yeah. And unfortunately, your father had an early demise, unfortunately.
He passed away in 1975, just before I graduated from high school. Mm-hmm. I remember sitting with him just probably the weekend before he passed away, and we were talking, and he was so pleased. I had just found out I had been accepted to the Naval Academy.
Naval Academy.
And that was a goal of mine at the time, was to get to the Naval Academy and then move on after that into the flying and hopefully eventually to the astronaut program. But he was very excited about that.
Very excited about that. Well, the whole Foreman family, all three of them are, well, of course, two are gone now. Your father and Joe died 2 days before you lifted off, is that correct?
Just about.
As a matter of fact, yes, a couple of days before. And Jack, still living, but all three were professional people. And there's a long story behind that, and we might be able to get into a little bit of that, but tell us a little bit about your mother's background, who her family members are, her sisters, brothers, or whatever, and her parents, and things like that too, because we don't know a lot about Nancy Foreman.
Right, her father was Fred Thalacker, and he, as I recall, a great guy. He passed away a long time ago, but I remember him as a young kid being a great guy. Always drove these marathon checker cab cars. That was his favorite car, and he always owned one of those. And I remember as a young kid riding around in the back of this huge car, that was designed
to be... They were nice. You can get in and out of them without any difficulty.
Sure, they were designed wonderful. To be driven forever, in New York City. And he wasn't from there. He lived in places like Kansas City, and that's where I remember visiting him. But
what did your grandfather, your mother's father, do?
He worked for the Federal Aviation Administration, so he went around, and as I recall, he went around and inspected lighting for airport approach systems and that sort of thing. So. And
now you have other cousins on your mother's side as well, and you have aunts and uncles on your mother's side?
I do. My mother had 2 brothers and a sister that I knew, and older brother who lives in Lexington,
Kentucky, right.
That's a tough one.
Now, it is a tough one. Lexington, Kentucky. Yes, there are too many syllables in there. But you
right.
did it correctly.
Yes.
But we'll take care of the alliterations, and you take care of the outer space. You do a beautiful job of that as well.
Anyway, her oldest brother, Mark, was a mechanical engineer living in Lexington, and worked for, I think, the Singer Sewing Machine Company.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm.
And they had 3 sons, so I have 3 cousins on that side of the family. And then my mother also had a sister. She, when I was young, lived up in Euclid, Ohio, so we would see them quite a bit. And then they moved to St. Louis, where they still live, and they have 2 sons, so I have 2 more cousins there. And then my mother also had a younger brother who has 2 daughters, and he lives outside the Dallas area.
Outside of Dallas. So we're talking about 5 people so far, is that correct?
So she had 2 brothers and a sister that lived and that I knew, and another one that I think that passed away early.
Oh, okay. And your mother made 5?
My mother made 5 total.
So for the whole family?
For the whole family.
We probably, the people in Wadsworth probably know the Foreman families quite well, and we're going to be talking about those people in a couple of minutes here, but we wanted to get your mother in there as well. And I wanted to say one thing about your mother. I remember the day that she came to Wadsworth with your dad, and I need to say, in her behalf, that the beauty quotient of Wadsworth was elevated 40% the day she walked in. She was a gorgeous person. She still is, but
still
she was
is,
a gorgeous
yeah,
person.
very nice to say
beautiful.
that.
And she had very, very handsome children as well. Now, we got past birth. Now let's go from, let's try elementary school and tell us a little bit about that, who your friends were, where you lived, and with whom you played, and things like this.
Well, I remember living on Highland Avenue early on in life here. I think that was the first house we lived in when we moved back to Wadsworth.
And who were some of your neighbors at the time that you remember playing with?
You know, Dr. Everhard
Yes.
and his family lived about 2 doors down from us, so we got to know the Everhard family at an early age.
And wonderful people in Wadsworth here, and they have a daughter who's a movie star. So we have a movie star on one side of the on one side of your house, and then an astronaut on the other. My heavens, we
right, right.
This is Wadsworth.
Yeah.
I mean, typical of Wadsworth: movie stars and astronauts. Right.
Right. There was an elderly woman there that didn't like us playing in her flowers. I remember, and I would probably mispronounce her name, Shank or Shink, Mrs.
Shank.
Shank, do you know that name?
Oh, surely, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
she lived
children
next door,
too.
and I think there were the Coles living on one side. Zimmermans lived nearby.
All right. Then they moved to Toledo.
They moved away. But I remember that was pre-kindergarten for me. I think I was going to the nursery school down the street at the Methodist Church at that age, and then just before I think we started kindergarten, or I started kindergarten, we moved up to Longview Drive, and I just had a short walk over to Valley View
School.
Elementary for.
And who were your first grade teachers? You remember those people?
Well, for first grade, I did kindergarten there at Valley View, and then I started getting on the bus and riding the bus to Sacred Heart.
Oh, okay. And who was your teacher there? Who was your teacher there?
Some of the teachers I remember, Mrs. Nagel for second grade. Sister Joseph Marie, I think, for maybe 3rd, 4th grade. Sister Sebastian, I think, was 5th grade, and I think she was also the principal at the time.
She was. Mrs. Nito?
Mrs. Nito was the other 4th grade teacher. I remember her well. I wasn't in her class, but across the hall was Mrs. Nito. My brothers all had Sister Helen.
Yes.
I remember Sister Helen.
Oh, yes, very well so.
She was a bruiser. Yeah. And then Sister Agnes, I think, was my 8th grade teacher. Boy, it's tough. I need to pull out my transcripts or something and review here.
That's good enough, though. That's wonderful. We just wanted to get some insight of where you went. Then you went to high school.
And I went to high school at Wadsworth High School.
What were some of the courses that you really, really thought were pursuant to what you were finally ended up doing?
Well, I enjoyed math all through grade school and high school, and I really enjoyed working in the math courses. And
who were some of your math teachers at this school?
Well, Mr. Schrock.
Mr. Schrock, Page Schrock.
Yes. Mr. Ben, I think, was a geometry teacher.
Ben wasn't his first, Mr. Bin, B-I-H-N.
Right.
Yes.
I think that's how you spell it.
Yeah.
Mr. Ben. Boy, should have studied. I should have studied more for this interview. I don't remember all the teachers'
Well,
names.
that's fine. But and what about your physics teacher?
Physics teacher, I think, was Mr. Varner.
Yes, sir, Mr. Varner, right.
Mr. Varner. He was a great physics teacher.
Outstanding physics teacher.
Yeah,
We've
and
had some outstanding teachers here in
very
Wadsworth.
enjoyable course as well. Mr. Kreider was our chemistry
Mr. Kreider,
teacher.
yes, Mr. Kreider was a chemistry teacher.
Right. And
Now, we don't dare forget your siblings, and we need to make sure that we get them accurately identified, because you will be in serious trouble if you don't get them identified properly.
Okay.
So let's go with the oldest one. You're the oldest in the family.
I'm the oldest, and then about a year younger than me is my brother Mark.
Mark.
And Mark is a construction carpenter and lives in the Seattle area. And then about a year after Mark was Paul, my next oldest brother, and he actually is a candy maker in Fleetwood, Pennsylvania.
Candy maker.
Yes, so
I would imagine more people in the world, despite the fact of your greatness, most people in the world will remember him because of the candy.
right.
Right.
Yeah, we actually took some of his candy to space with us. And,
Oh, did you really?
Yes. When we docked to the space station, our commander, Dom Gorey, he was well prepared. He took some of Paul's candy. He took a little charm that he had made for Peggy Whitson, the commander of the space station, with the inscription on the charm of the module that we were bringing up. And he took her a shirt, one of our crew shirts that matched our shirts that we were wearing. So he said, I brought everything that a woman could want: clothing, jewelry, and candy.
What else would you want?
And so,
those
you know, it
things.
was kind of fun that Paul got involved in that and provided the candy for that.
You know, so many times when a person has achieved the greatness that you have, the siblings fall short of having made a contribution to that. We have forgotten one person yet in your family, and we need to have her brought into as well.
I have a sister, Kate.
Kate.
She's a little younger. She's 6 years younger than myself, but she is Ohio State alum and lives in Hudson now with her former Marine attorney husband, and he was a JAG officer in the Marine Corps and retired.
So the people will understand that JAG is Judge Advocate General, which is the equivalent to what a judge around here, isn't it?
He was a judge actually in the JAG. He was an attorney, a Marine Corps attorney, so he represented and prosecuted Marines for offenses, and then graduated on to the bench and became a judge in the JAG Corps, and then retired after about 21 years and came back to Akron to practice law, and they live nearby here in Hudson.
In Hudson. The reason I mentioned the continuum of family members helping out and so forth, what kind of support did you feel from your sister and your two brothers during your growing up period? Now, you were the oldest and therefore probably the leader and all of these other kinds of things, but you know, siblings play a very, very definite role. What kinds of things did you remember that they did that you cherish?
Yeah, my brothers and I played baseball together, which was a lot of fun, because to have three brothers, you know, close enough in age to actually play on the same baseball teams, you know, in Little League and those kind of things, that was a lot of fun. And it was, I think, rare because, you know, it's just, we were all actually just 13 months apart. So,
but you didn't play football, is that right?
I didn't play in Pee Wee football. I played in high school football, and my brothers did play in Pee Wee football.
And
I was
the
playing
coach?
soccer and that sort of thing.
Who was your coach in
high school?
High school?
Coach Mast, Lowell Mast was
Lowell
the coach,
Mast.
and then Dick Boron was the head coach when I was a senior.
You graduated in 1975,
Right.
so that's been a few years
Yes.
back, isn't it?
It has been a few years. I saw Dave Sladke, though, another great coach of mine from high school, just last night. It's good to kind of renew that
Relationship. Now, you mentioned a moment ago, Mike, that a week before your father passed away, you had been accepted into the Naval Academy. Tell us a little bit about that contest. It's typically a very difficult thing to do. Now tell us a little bit about that. What do you have to do to be accepted?
Well, I'll back up just a second here, and I'll say that, you know, I always wanted to be an astronaut, and so when I was 8 or 9 years old and the Gemini space program was ongoing, I looked into what it took to be an astronaut because the job enthralled me. I was just, you know, on the edge of my seat watching these launches and landings that my parents would let me stay up late for even to watch, and I thought that would be a great job. So I got this book that the original 7 astronauts wrote, We 7, and I started reading that book, and a lot of these guys had been in the Navy. They'd been Navy pilots, so I thought, well, that's the way to go. My dad had been in the Navy as well, so that kind of reinforced that plan to me, and I thought, well, I'll go in the Navy and I'll be a pilot, and then I'll be an astronaut. And I told this plan to my dad at a young age, and he said, well, if you're ever thinking about going in the Navy, you should investigate this place called the Naval Academy. And I thought, what's the Naval Academy? And I wrote to the Naval Academy, and they sent me this nice college catalog, and it had nice, great pictures of guys playing soccer and baseball, and not a lot of pictures of guys sitting in class all day, but it looked exciting.
Kind of a lost leader thing, you know, get you in here, then we'll take.
Right, exactly. So that's how I got interested in the Naval Academy, and I thought, yeah, this is the way to go. I'll go to the Naval Academy, I'll be a Navy pilot, and I'll be an astronaut. And so I started to pursue that, and as you know, to get into the Naval Academy, you have to start this process in your junior year in high school to get an appointment. You first have to gain a nomination from a politician.
And who was the politician here?
Charles Mosher was our representative at the time.
From Oberlin.
Oberlin, okay. Yeah. So he was our representative at the time, and I still have that letter somewhere framed that says, congratulations, because he was the one that notified me that I had actually received an appointment from the Naval Academy after going through this long process. And of course, we started in the junior year, got a nomination, and then had to submit all the transcripts and take the college entrance tests, of course, and do all that. And then it wasn't until spring, March of my senior year when I actually found out that I'd been accepted.
Now, to be sure, the Charlie Mosher, whom we all knew, as a matter of fact, I spent a week with him one time. We are politically not aligned, but he was a very good friend of ours, and then when he passed on, Don Pease became the representative. And both are from different political parties, but both were very, very close to each other, and as a result of that, we had some articulation. Now, knowing Charlie Mosher, before he ever thought of offering even the first letter of the first word, he checked you out. That's how honest he was. He was a straightforward person. Now, this means that it was not a political appointment. It was necessary to become a political appointment for you to become a naval cadet. But before he did that, you are the ones who really did it. I mean, it was your background. So, you know, you must take all of the credit for that. His was just one of those little things that you have to do. The reason I'm asking about this is that the catalog showed people playing soccer and probably doing all kinds of stunts and so forth, but what was the Naval Academy curriculum like? Probably one of the toughest in the United States.
Well, it was tough. I had nothing to compare it to, of course, and high school was came fairly easy to me, and I didn't do a lot of homework and that sort of thing, and got decent grades. Could have gotten better grades if I had done the homework, I'm sure, but graduated with a good grade average and fairly high in my class in high school. Got to the Naval Academy, and whoa, you know, you got to buckle down here, or else you know, you drop your pencil and you're 2 weeks behind.
That's right. That's right.
And it was a tough engineering school, and I was so interested in math and science that I decided to follow my Uncle Jack and become an engineer, and I studied aerospace engineering there, and learned quickly that I could not hang out with the English and history majors, you know, because they didn't have the same they didn't need to have the same work ethic to get through the 4 years.
It's one of the toughest schools in the United States.
Well, I thought they had a very good program. I'm not sure. My son, my oldest son, is a graduate of Texas A&M mechanical engineering, and watching him go through that, I thought, well, I'm glad I don't have to do that now. It might be an age thing, but...
well, also, there's a little bit more knowledge that has been learned recently, which of course was not really...
The books are a little thicker.
A little thicker at the present time.
Yeah.
We're going to take a little vacation from this just for a quarter of a second, because you mentioned something here which brings questions to our mind. You have a son who went through college. That means that somewhere along the line you have a family other than NASA,
right,
correct?
Right.
And incidentally, NASA forbids us from doing anything other than to follow a script that they have had. But could we just very quickly, without your saying it, because you're not allowed to, but if I could say that you learned to fly in Wadsworth at a certain particular park in Wadsworth, but we're not allowed to mention that name at this present time. You learned to fly at about age 15, is that right?
I started doing ground school at Sky Park, where we can't mention, but I started doing the ground school while I was in high school, finished it. Didn't start flying until I was actually finished with my freshman year in college and going to the Naval Academy. I had about a month of training in the summer, but I did have about 2 months off during that summer.
I remember a very dear friend of mine, Dan Wellstein, always talking about this one lad that he had who was such an outstanding person. Now, you are not allowed to mention his name, but I thought that I would just bring that up because he did talk to me about that. Getting back to your family, tell us, wife, obviously.
Right.
Tell us about wife.
Well, I met Lori Dancer at the Naval Academy. My class at the Naval Academy was the last class that was all male. And while we were there as my freshman year, Congress said that next year all the service academies will have women, and there was some rejoicing, and you know, I don't know.
Rejoicing. I'll bet there's some rejoicing.
I don't know if you've been in attendance at an all-male school, but you know, there's something lacking there, and
Quite a bit.
And so the next year they invited women, and Lori was from Oklahoma City, and she was accepted into the first class that had women at the Naval Academy. Now, they were off limits. The freshmen, you can't talk to the freshmen, except in a professional way, of course. And so I couldn't talk to her about dating or anything like that until the following year. But I had my eye on her, and that following year, when she was a sophomore and I was a junior now, we started to date. And one of the first things she told me, one of our first dates, which I think was to the Army-Navy game that year in Philadelphia, she said, I don't think this Naval Academy place is for me. I'm going to leave after this semester, and I'm going back to Oklahoma. And I thought, oh no. But we kept in touch, and no email, of course, at the time, but a lot of letter writing and phone calls back and forth. And we stayed in touch, and I pursued her, and it worked out in my favor, and we got married after I graduated.
Now, did she continue with any kind of service orientation, or did she go somewhere else too?
She went to Oklahoma State University, and then we got married before she finished. She is a civil engineer by training, and she finished her degree while I was in flight school in Pensacola, Florida. She was attending the University of South Alabama in Mobile, so she has a diploma from that institution. So she's a Jaguar. But she's always worked in the construction business, and now is a big-time construction program manager, nationally known. And I tell her that her resume is impressive because I took her all around the country with my Navy career, forcing her to get jobs in different locations in different parts of the construction industry.
And what were the words she said to refute that?
Well, I think she agrees with me a little bit, not completely, but she is she's managed billions and billions of dollars in construction in her career, and very impressive. And one of her recent projects in Houston, the Hobby Center, which is a big performing arts theater downtown Houston, and Lakewood Church.
She did that?
She converted our Compact Center into a Lakewood Church for Joel Osteen and his group there. So
I was in a hotel in Houston overlooking that one time, and it's a whole city.
Right, right.
I mean, it's bigger than Wadsworth, actually, almost.
Yeah, it's, well,
and she did that.
Yeah,
she's impressive. She's
she is impressive
also.
Yeah, I always say if I was half as successful at my career as she is at hers, I'd be really going somewhere.
You know, if you would stop traveling around the world and settle down somewhere. How many miles did you go? 6 million what?
It was 6,578,000, something like.
That's a fur piece.
Yes.
You would not want to walk it.
No.
You would not want to walk
No.
it. Now then, marriages many times, and in this case probably did, produce some children. Tell us about the children and make sure to get the names right.
Thank you. Now we have 3 kids. We have our oldest son is named Jim.
Jim.
Coincidentally, and
After your father.
after my father, and he is 23 years old, married to another Texas A&M graduate.
And whom did he marry?
He married a girl from Friendswood, the town, the little Wadsworth-like town that we live in outside Houston, and they were in high school together. Didn't date until they got to Texas A&M, but
Even though they were allowed to.
they were allowed to.
You weren't allowed to date.
I wasn't
but he
allowed
was-
to
yeah,
date, but he was, and but he pursued her, I think, much like I pursued my wife, and they got married, and now we're both working as engineers in Houston and doing real well. And then we have a second son, a 19-year-old named Jack,
After your uncle?
after my uncle, and my wife has an Uncle Jack also. Both of those uncles we were very fond of, and so that name we liked very well, and gave that to our second son. And then he is a freshman, just finished his freshman year at Trinity University in San Antonio. He'd like to be a doctor. So
Trinity, I'm not familiar with Trinity. What kind of university is that?
Trinity is a small liberal arts college. It was perfect for our middle son, I think. Our oldest son went to that huge Ohio State-like size university,
monster, yeah.
A&M. But this Trinity University, a small school in San Antonio, beautiful campus in the hills there in San Antonio. It started way back when by the Presbyterians, but now is not affiliated.
Right.
A liberal arts college, and he's studying pre-med there, and really likes it.
That is wonderful. Now, what about number 3?
Number 3, we have a third. We have a daughter, Amy Jo.
And her name's not Kate.
Her name is not Kate, no.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kate. But her name is Amy Jo, and she just finished her sophomore year in high school, and she's not sure where she wants to go to school or what she wants to do. But
Well, you can be assured, I'm positive, Mike, that there's some young boy down at that school who's watching her as you watched Lori. And
well, that's what I'm afraid of. But
You're afraid
thanks
of.
for bringing that up.
you're afraid of that. Now, we have no grandchildren.
No grandchildren yet.
And when we interview you another time, if we have grandchildren, make sure that we have the right ages and all those other kinds of things, right?
We'll do that.
Let's go back to your career again, because that is so important. The Navy flight school that you went to really prepared you to do a lot of things in flying, obviously. But there were certain elements of the flight school or of the flying that in which you excelled. Now, you won't say that you excelled, but in reading your biography, which all of us in Wadsworth have done, incidentally, as a matter of fact, I suspect at the present time that there are people in Wadsworth who have never read a book what they've read about you, and we're so proud of you, really are proud of you. Mike, tell us a little bit about what you did with that flying that eventually then put you into a position where you're able to go to 6 million miles around the Earth 250 times.
Well, I started out flying P3s in the Navy, big 4-engine turboprop.
Tell us about the P3s. That's something which very, very few people would know about today.
Right. The P3 is designed at the time to track submarines. And you remember in the early 80s when I first started flying in the Navy, the Russians had their submarines off our coast.
Right off the coast.
Missiles pointed, and we
Right.
wanted to know where those submarines were, and that was our job in the P3 Navy, to fly these big airplanes off the coast and out, patrol, track these submarines.
And did you ever track one?
Yeah, we did all the time. So we were very fortunate to be able to track the submarines, find out where they were, keep track of them, so that if ever something bad ever did happen, we'd know where they were and do something about it. So.
What was the closest those submarines got to us? Probably 200 miles or something like that.
I'm sure probably closer than that.
Oh, really?
But, yeah, but the ones that we tracked with the ballistic missiles didn't need to get that close because they had 5,000 mile range missiles. So.
Well, 5,000 mile range, if they're 200 miles, it would be over in the Pacific Ocean, so
right,
that'd be
we
okay.
wouldn't have to worry. So we did that, and I was still had this goal of becoming an astronaut, so I thought, well, it'd probably be a good idea if I went to test pilot school, and I heard all about the Navy's test pilot school, and it sounded like a lot of fun. If you like to fly airplanes, you like to be a test pilot because you get to fly a lot of different airplanes, and you learn even more about flying and things. And so I started to apply to test pilot school, and I didn't get accepted the first 7 times that I applied. And in that meantime, I took orders to the Navy's postgraduate school in Monterey, California, which is a garden spot, great place to live actually, except for the prices and the crowds. But it was very pleasant living out there in Monterey near Pebble Beach, and did a master's degree in aerospace engineering there, and continued to apply to test pilot school. Started to apply to NASA at the time also, because I thought, well, if you want to be an astronaut, they're not going to just come and knock on your door and ask you to be an astronaut. You have to apply.
And so, some of us wouldn't accept anyway.
Right.
I'm one of them.
So I started to go through that application process as well, and continued to apply to the test pilot school. Eventually got accepted to test pilot school, and this kind of goes back to your question about flying, and so I got to go to the Navy test pilot school and graduate from there, and after about a year of working as a test pilot for the Navy, they called me back and asked me if I wanted to be an instructor at the Navy test pilot school, which was, like putting a kid in the candy store.
This is what I was getting at, the fact that you were able to instruct others as well.
Yes, so I was fortunate to go back there and fly everything from the F-18 to the gliders that we had. So, and sometimes on the same day, you could fly a glider in the morning and a supersonic F-18 in the afternoon.
Well, now your Uncle Joe was a glider pilot.
Right,
yes.
right. Yes,
so
very good one.
Yes, he was. You kept this in the family. We're going to run out of time unless we get a hold of some of these other questions, and I'm sure this is what our audience would really like to hear. Some of the personal things about your flight. Now, yesterday when you gave the presentation at the school, and I suspect that everywhere you have given the presentation, people talk about where do you go to the bathroom and so forth and so on, how do you go to the bathroom. We might be able to get into that, but before we get to the bathroom part here, how about some personal feelings that you had as you were sitting in that capsule, knowing fully well that within the matter of 8 minutes you're going to be going 17,500 miles an hour from zero. You were sitting still, and you were buckled in, and there's no way that you could parachute out or anything. What was your feeling? What was the main feeling that you had?
Well, I think the main feeling that you have, especially sitting there strapped into this thing for 2 hours or more, waiting for the countdown to click down, and NASA puts a hold in their countdown at 9 minutes. So you get down to 9 minutes, but you still have about 40 minutes to wait until the clock starts again.
Oh, it's like a football game,
Right. And then eventually they poll all the flight controllers and everybody and say, are we go? And everybody says we're go. And then they come out of this 9 minute hold, and it starts clicking down from 9 minutes. And then you think, wow, we're really going to go do this, barring something crazy here that could keep us from launching, we're really going to go. And so it was exciting, and sort of the culmination of a long time, hoping to get there. And
what was the feeling when the blast off? I mean, your entire system had to go into some kind of a horrible shock.
Well, it felt kind of like sitting at a stop sign and being rear-ended by a Mack truck. Just all of a sudden you get this pow, this wham in your backside, and you're going somewhere, and hopefully to space. But right before, it was kind of interesting. They have a water system that they flow water underneath the launch pad to absorb a lot of the energy from the rocket engines and to prevent damage, really, and to kind of suppress the sound a little bit. And I had a mirror on my wrist that I could, as I'm laying there, I could hold up my arm, and through my mirror I could see out the windows at the top of the vehicle and all the way down into that flame trench. And I thought, you know, with about 10 seconds to go, I could see the water flowing, and I said, wow, the water's flowing. That's pretty cool. We're really going to go somewhere. And then I thought, well, I should probably pay attention to what I'm supposed to look at. And we started going uphill, as we call it. And we were expecting a very boring ride to space, because we're used to being in a simulator where as soon as you launch in the simulator, bad things start happening, and you have to deal with this and that and pull out your checklist and do this step and take care of problems. And we were expecting a very boring, you know, this is the real thing and nothing will go wrong. And as soon as we lifted off, the master caution alarm came on, and it was, you know, beeping in our headsets and flashing, and we saw the messages on our displays that we had lost some reaction control system jets, which are the really small jets that we use to maneuver around when we get into space. So at first blush, it didn't seem like too big a deal, except, you know, you're kind of shocked back into reality when you see all these lights and sirens going off. And what had happened really was just a computer card had come loose in one of our computer bays somewhere at the jar of the launch. I suspect kind of shook this card loose, and it came out, and without that card talking to these jets, the whole system said, well, these jets are bad now, you can't use them. And that was the indication we were getting, which we didn't completely figure out at the time. But a couple minutes later, our Capcom in Houston told us, don't worry about those jet messages, that's no big deal. And about that time, it was about 3.5 minutes into the flight, because one of my procedures says at 3 minutes to check our cooling, the cockpit cooling, and make sure that we switch over to a new cooling system at about 2 minutes, and so it kicks in and starts cooling us down. And I checked, and at 3 minutes the temperature was where it was supposed to be. And about 3.5 minutes into the flight, the ground calls us and says, you need to work this step for this high cooling. And I looked up, and sure enough, the thermometer had gone back up to the hot range, and it was,
oh boy!
It was so we got to pull out our checklist then and do a couple of steps to switch controllers. So it was no big deal, easy fix, but all things that we weren't expecting to do. So the things that were going through my mind were, gee, this is kind of like a simulator ride. You know,
right.
This is kind of like how we trained. So in that vein, I guess maybe it was good. You know, we were just going through the things that we're typically seeing. But
in the simulator, did you have that Mack truck hitting in the back end?
It didn't replicate that as well. No, not at all. The simulator kind of shakes us around and gives us a little bit of a thump, but it's nowhere near the same kind of ride.
Same kind of a ride. Now, one of the questions that I'm sure other people will have as well, regarding your own personal feelings. We know fully well that NASA has, for every space launch, 200 or 300 people on the ground, or how many do they have?
Oh, I'm sure thousands of people.
Thousands of people on the ground.
Monitoring systems and working and
all over the place.
All over the place.
But is there one guy? I mean, a committee can't make the decision. Is there one guy who makes all the decisions?
There is. In Florida, there's a launch director, and he makes all the decisions to launch. And then as soon as you launch, the flight director in Houston takes over, and his team, who has been monitoring all the systems from Houston Mission Control, takes over. Now he's in charge. So as soon as we get off the pad, it reverts to Houston and Mission Control. But there's a launch director in Florida, and he and his team in the Launch Control Center are monitoring everything at that point, and he's the one that makes the final decision to launch. And he gets a go from the Houston flight director as well, that the Houston system's all ready to accept that vehicle. And
I imagine that that person, whoever it is, the one who finally gives the go-ahead, probably has a million thoughts going through his mind as well.
Sure.
All the time.
Yeah.
When you're up in space and you look down, now you in your talk yesterday, you said that you went over Australia several times during the daytime. You're going 17,500 miles an hour, which is about 16,500 miles an hour faster than the Earth is rotating. At some point, did you not have a different location at which daylight would be appearing, or what am I missing in the calculations here?
Well, of course, you're going around the Earth every 90 minutes, so
Okay.
you're going through a complete sunrise and sunset every 90 minutes. Typically in our orbit, we would see about 50, 55 minutes of daylight and about 40, 35 minutes of nighttime each orbit. And so it was just surreal almost that you could be looking at a checklist in full daylight there inside the space shuttle, and all of a sudden you look outside and it's nighttime because it comes so quickly. You're traveling so fast that a sunset or sunrise just happens.
And obviously, excuse me, obviously the sun has no clouds and has no atmosphere through which to distort its light waves.
Mm-hmm.
How does the sun look up there to you when you're...
Well, it's very bright.
Very bright.
To say the least. So, yeah, there's no way you can look at the sun. We had almost like welder glasses to wear in case when we were docking with the space station. And of course, to dock with another vehicle, you have to look outside, and at times the geometry is such that the sun is going to be behind the space station where you're trying to look and dock. So we were prepared with almost, like I say, welder glasses to wear to protect our eyes.
To protect your eyes.
To,
now, also in what you talked about yesterday, you said that and incidentally, we're talking here on the, what is today, the 17th of June. So for posterity, you spoke to the high school, at the middle school yesterday, to two groups of people on the 16th of June, 2008. And today is, for posterity, 50 years from now, we would want people to know that we were speaking on June 17th, 2008. And yesterday you spoke about two or three things, one of which was that when you left the space station, that you were able to maneuver around it. I mean, at 17,500 miles an hour, I would suspect that you would have to have a pretty long sweep to get around because you just can't make a quick turn. How did you do that? How did you
well,
maneuver?
again, we're using those reaction control system jets, the smaller
those
jets,
little jets,
to first back away from the space station so that when we kind of did this loop around it, nobody was going to be worried that we would bump into it. And our pilot, Greg Johnson, was at the controls, and we'd done it many times in the simulator, and he was very well prepared to do that. And we had a laser to check the distance to the space station for him, and continually give him updates to tell him, okay, now you're 610 feet. You know, can you come in about 10 feet to get back to 600 feet? And he continually did and right, everything is going 17,500 miles an hour, but everything is going that speed. So
right, so that's right.
So relatively speaking, you know, you're just making really small jet pulses to get you, you know, a little bit out in front, and then come back around. And
now, this is the other question: if the space station is going 17,500 miles an hour, and you're leaving Cape Canaveral, do you wait until it's right up above so that you can go hit it, or
just about?
Because you can't catch up with it, obviously.
Right. Well, that is how they design those flights. Is that when you are launching, the space station is just about overhead, because when they figure out how much propellant it's going to take once you get into space to actually catch up and rendezvous, they want to minimize that, because we only have a limited amount of propellant, obviously, that we carry into space to do those burns that propel us ahead and get us to catch up with the space station. So there is an optimum location for that space station when we launch, and for that reason we only have about a 5-minute launch window each day when we attempt to launch, because if we're outside of that 5-minute window,
you can't make it.
You just can't. You don't have enough propellant to make
enough time. Now, with your, shall we say, your scientific acumen, could you help us to understand that if there is no atmosphere 200 miles up, what does the jet propulsion push against to turn you around?
Well, it it's the thrusters that we use are actually, that's a good question. These things are combining two, first off, they're combining a fuel and an oxidizer that explodes when you bring these two materials together. And that's what the thrust is this combination of materials that explodes and causes this jet blast out one of these ports in the space shuttle, and as that material, and there's a mass of material going that way out the nozzle of that jet, then there's going to be an equal force the other way.
But if there's nothing against which it pushes, can there be an equal force? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Well, the force when that material comes out is reacting on the vehicle where it exploded, and it's forcing out. And so the force is the other way.
Okay. In other words, it's hitting against something.
It's hitting against something so that it can go that way and you can go that way.
That way, yeah. Now, again, we're going to be running out of time here, and we're going to come back to this if we have a couple of minutes. Let's talk a little bit more about the Foreman family and who they are in Wadsworth. And I think that the citizens of Wadsworth would like to know a great deal about the Foremans and your grandmother, Foreman, who was an O'Mara.
Right.
And the O'Mara family is a large family here in Wadsworth. As a matter of fact, when I was growing up, we had 4 of them in our neighborhood. We were surrounded by the O'Mara girls who were married to various people, one of whom was Cecil Foreman, your grandfather. One was Louis Guiley. Ruth was married to Louis Guiley. And Lomi O'Mara was married to Hickman.
Dan?
No, Dan is his son.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I never met.
It'll come to me. I can't think of this phrase, but it'll come to me. And then Tom O'Mara, who was married to Vern Hickman, who was married to Vern Hickman's sister.
Oh, really?
Yes, lived there as well. So,
and her name was Mary?
No.
Let me try to remember.
You
know my family better than I do.
Well, the old timers, right? Helen.
Okay.
Helen.
Okay.
Helen O'Mara. But they all, one lived across the street, 2 lived on the right-hand side, and so forth. The O'Mara girls numbered, 5 or 6 of them, and they are still around Wadsworth. There's still people in Wadsworth who are related to the O'Mara girls. And one of the things that I really think that would be a particular note would be that your grandmother, Nina O'Mara Foreman, was blind in her later years.
In her later years, she was blind, yes.
And she had 3 sons, and those 3 sons, with the absolutely meagerest of livelihood, became professional people. So, you know, this needs to be a lesson in hope for other people.
Sure.
That irrespective of what, the beginnings are, that there can be greatness here. It reminds me of that old adage that even the smallest spark can cause the biggest forest fire. And this is what has happened to the O'Mara girls and the Foremans, and certainly with your family as well. I wanted to share that with our group because I think that people look at astronauts as being something that doesn't exist anywhere else, but they're just regular people who have made themselves great through hard work and so forth. One other quick question I wanted to ask about your personal life is, tell us a little bit about your wife. I know that she is a construction person and so forth, but tell us a little bit about her. I mean, we'd love to know about her.
Well, she's, my best friend, and she has been so supportive in my career. She has known from day one what my goals were in life, and she's always supported them 100%. And just a perfect mother to our children. She is always working, doing something. She can't sit still. For stress relief, she comes home and after long days battling Houston traffic and with her construction projects, comes home, does gardening. In the colder months, she does stained glass. She makes stained glass windows and just always busy doing something. Whereas, you know, I'd just as soon come home, sit down on the couch and watch Tiger Woods play golf, you know, and relax. But she's just a great woman, and really, you know, not too far off the mark from my grandmother, Nina O'Mara Foreman, who in my mind was, you know, the matriarch of this family that I grew up in. And just, you know, got things done, and she didn't take a whole lot of guff, and
no, the Foreman girls did not. I mean, the O'Mara girls did not take a lot of guff. I knew all of them.
And my mother, my wife is much like my grandmother in that respect, and my mother as well. You know, there was a lot of similarities between my grandmother, my mother, and my wife. I think they're all strong women, and they raise these families. And
that's right, strong women. That's right, and they make strong men. Going back to the to the shuttle once again, the question that, as you know, I've been in education all my life, and I've watched students in these kinds of interviews with not necessarily astronauts, but people who had flown and so forth, or who knew astronauts. They always ask the question about bathrooms. Tell us the questions that you would like to share with us about going to the bathroom. I mean, that's a horrible thing, but
of course, you know, that's a requirement for these spacecraft to have somewhere to go to the bathroom, and the space shuttle has a waste containment system. We call it the WCS, waste containment system, and it's sort of a little closet down in the middeck. Not much room in there at all, but it uses a vacuum system, and
tell us why the vacuum system.
Vacuum to draw the materials into it, because there's no gravity, of course, up there for us to count on. Was very easy to urinate into, because it had a hose that you took out of its holder, and as soon as you pulled the hose out, the vacuum system automatically started for you. And we had each of us on the crew had our own plastic cone that snapped on to the end, and we could urinate into the hose, and that worked out really easily. Now, when you had to go number 2, it was a little trickier, because you had to go through, we have a cue card there that reminds us the step-by-step process so we don't screw this up, and get in there, sit down. Kind of sit down is, you know, means hold yourself down.
Hold yourself down.
And there are actually some little leg clamps that you can pull up, spring force, pull up over your legs to kind of help you stay down on the seat, or else you might just float away while you were trying to do your business, and that wouldn't be good. But it also, that little slide you open with a lever, and there's a hole, small hole, about 3 or 4 inches in diameter, that you have to hit the mark, and there's also a fan in there, circulating air, which actually draws a little bit of a vacuum, and so materials going down in get pulled down, and because we don't want them to come back out, of course.
Of course.
And so it's a tricky process. You know, our commander Dom Gorey said, you know, when you first use this thing, you really want to take all your clothes off because, you know, messes can happen the first couple of times when you're learning to use this thing. We had one in Houston to train with, but of course there, you know, you have the gravity, and you think you might know how to use it, but until you have that added effect of being weightless at the time, you really don't know. And so
that's the other question I wanted to ask you. The weightless, I mean, that has to be something that people dream about all their lives, you know, being able to fly through the air and so forth. What was your feeling when you first became weightless?
Well, it was just kind of amazing. You know, we became weightless as soon as our engines cut off after 8.5 minutes into orbit, and the engines cut off, and we immediately start floating out of our seats. We were still buckled into our seats, or else we would have drifted off and had a hard time focusing on the instruments that we were still working with there.
Imagine.
So, but once we were kind of ready to change out of our orange suits, we took turns going down to the middeck, changing out of our orange suits back into our just normal shirt sleeve. It was just amazing. I think, you know, you unbuckled and immediately you're just floating, and everything is floating. You take your gloves off and they're floating, and you got to make sure you stuff them away, or else they're going to get lost somewhere, because they'll just go anywhere. And
That's the part. Now, as you were hanging outside, I can't fathom this. As you were hanging outside the space shuttle, you were actually in the sky, right?
right, right,
Not inside anything at all.
right.
Were you hooked on? Were you tethered?
Sure, we were definitely tethered, and we stayed tethered the whole time. We have an 85-foot reel of steel cable that we use as our tether that stays hooked to the space station and hooked to us the whole time. So if we were to let go and drift away where we couldn't quite reach,
Oh my heavens.
we would be on this tether, and it would eventually get us back to the space station.
Just talking about it is
Yeah.
enough to cause a person to...
It's fantastic, really, being outside. You're wearing this suit that's basically a spacecraft in itself, because it has to protect you from the cold and the heat and any kind of, sharp edge maybe, and
Right.
it provides your oxygen and your cooling and your electrical power to drive the fans in the suit. So it's amazing.
What is the temperature out there?
It varies from about plus 200 to minus 200, depending on where we are in the orbit, on the side with the sun or on the dark side, in the shade. So
And you were not in any way cold or hot at any time?
the only time I was even a little bit cold, I was at one of the spacewalks. I was just standing holding this robotic arm for about 40 minutes while my spacewalk partner for that spacewalk, Rick Linehan, was lifting up this body of this robot that we were going to attach this arm to. And my left hand just started to get a little chilly, and we have glove heaters, so I reached over and turned on the glove heater on this left hand, and that relieved it fine. We have a thermostat on the front of the suit, but I really never needed to adjust it. It kept me comfortable all the time.
What were your thoughts when you were looking straight down 200 miles onto Earth?
I had a number of thoughts. When I first came out, I remember saying, wow, where are we right now? And that question was for the people on the ground, and they, a few minutes later, radioed back that we were somewhere, China or somewhere. And a little later, probably the next time we came over about the same area, we were over the Himalayas, and it was just amazing to look down at the Himalayan mountains, knowing that Mount Everest was amongst those bumps in the earth, and just watching them go by.
And you could see it.
Yeah, you could see, it was plain as day. That most of the mission we saw a lot of clouds, but that particular view is burned in my brain.
For instance, if you're in Japan, which is an island, could you see the whole island at one time?
You could see just about the whole island of Japan at one time. It's fairly big. It's about 4 or 5 islands.
And the map makers got the right
Yeah,
planes.
they seem to get it right. Australia, I'm a little more of an expert on Australia because, like I said previously, we flew over Australia a lot. It seemed like it was almost the crew joke, we're about to fly over Australia again.
Mike, well, unfortunately, we have to come to an end of this, but the City of Wadsworth wants to say thank you, not only for putting Wadsworth on the map, and you indeed have. I suspect that the one person who has put Wadsworth on the map is Mike Foreman.
Well,
as a result of that. And probably when you were born, when you were growing up in Wadsworth, you thought to yourself, in your humble way, and you are indeed a humble person despite your greatness, in your humble way you probably said to yourself, well, I just want to go out there and fly airplanes. But you flew airplanes for not only mankind, but the airplanes that you flew, this great big one that you went 6 million miles, put Wadsworth on the map, and we are indebted to you, and we will always remember you as the astronaut from Wadsworth. And thank you for sharing those thoughts with us today.
Well, Caesar, thank you, and I'll always remember you as well as a great human being, and I've always enjoyed talking with you, and you've done some great work, and I appreciate it, and I really am proud to be from Wadsworth, Ohio. I think this is just a great community to grow up in. When we move around the country with my career, we always look for those hamlets that remind me of Wadsworth, and I think this is just a model place to be.
Mike, thank you much.
Thank you.
Right.